Flawedcast number 122, A Conspiracy of Covenant. The ancient covenant is in pieces. Man knows at last that he is alone in the universes in feeling immensity out of which is emerged only by chance. His destiny is nowhere spelled out, nor is it his duty. The kingdom above or the darkness below is for him to choose. Jacques Monod. Good morning, Flawedcast listeners, and good morning and welcome to my buddy, trusty sidekick, Mr. Carl Tuckerson. Carl, how was your week?
It was wonderful, Mr. William, and it's good to be here.
Yes,
I'd rather be nowhere else than the seat right here. So I'm doing very well.
Well, thank you. That's high praises, so I appreciate that. And we're glad that you guys are tuning in. Once again, thank you for all the sharing, all the comments. Thank you for just reposting and subscribing. Please continue to do that. Please continue to share wherever you can listen to podcasts. Flawedcast, CLE, Apple, Google Play, Spotify, Breaker. We're on Rumble, sort of on YouTube. That's under Flawed Inc. You can find us on the Project Mockingbird social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We are doing well on Parler, doing well on Getter, doing well on Gab. That's under Flawed Inc. Get a copy of my book, Smith's Heart of Man, Repir Manual, celebrating the 1-year anniversary this week of that book being out. And working on my next project, and also have been talking to some folks that I don't know, maybe there's a potentiality of a new edition of Smith's Heart of Man Repair Manual potentially in the works. So we'll see. But anyway, link below to get that on Amazon. Thanks for the people that have been picking it up lately. If you want a copy and money's a little tight, please send us an email at flawedinccle@gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to send you a PDF. Also, if you have anything you want to talk to us about, any comments, concerns, questions, send us an email there. But this is Mr. Tuckerson's second favorite portion of the podcast, and I'm going to allow him to do it, the patriotic 22 seconds.
Yes,
See
everyone,
get it in there.
Let's get patriotic and put our right hand over our left heart and repeat after us. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, like doing that. Anyway, so Mr. Tuckerson has a great outline today, and as we've been doing, and I've really been liking more the less structured, more the just kind of going off the top of our head, seeing where our conversations go and are being led. But this is going to be a real interesting one, and this is one that the topic he brought up, and it's something I've been pondering. So I'm interested to see where this goes, and I have a feeling it's going to end up where neither of us expected. So take it away, Carl.
Well, you can guarantee that. Things have kind of shifted in the format of our podcast. And for those that may be newer to the podcast, this has kind of become two guys sitting in the man cave, just kicking it, just like really letting it rip and sharing their thoughts. Would you not agree with that?
I think that's accurate. Two pseudo-philosophical idiots.
I concur with that.
Commiserating about God and the world and the overall idiocy that we have to endure.
Yeah, and I think that in our conversations that generally are daily, we just start on Monday, usually, sometimes Tuesday, sharing where we are and what's happening. And a lot of it is based on what is happening in our country and in the world. Am I correct in saying that?
100%.
So in a sense, that's why I think with the two guys just sitting around talking about it, maybe that's not just us. Maybe that's where a lot of people are now, is that based on what's happening and what they're going through and what they're dealing with and what they're struggling with and what they dislike, which is becoming more and more, and what you see that you like appears to be becoming less and less and less. So, you need to talk. You need to get things off your chest.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think people have always been conversing. I think the hour of history that we're occupying, and I know we're going to get into it this week, the subject matter is changing to where if it were just a couple dudes like you and I just hanging out, we could talk about anything from sports to weather to cigar, whatever. In not unimportant but inconsequential things, to whereas now, and certainly within just this week alone, I mentioned to you, like having real deep conversations that are a reflection of the hour we live in and how people are now starting to awaken or be aroused or just starting to notice invisible forces, or this invisible kingdom, if you will, kingdoms that are at odds with one another. And it's been a real interesting thing. I'm sure we're going to get into that, but I've been really fascinated with the idea that you presented this week. And I hope we can really start to get into it and present this idea that may seem antiquated and old-fashioned to some in a really relevant and necessary way.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Well, I want to introduce the topic of covenants. And most people don't understand, including me. It's deep. It's a deep dive.
Right.
To the depth you want to go, there's never an end to this word covenant, what it means. But it's been transitioned over time to where I think it's kind of been stripped down to words like treaties or an agreement.
Yeah.
Or here's the big one, a contract.
Yeah.
Well, where we are in this period of history is that there's a saying, and it's so true, that contracts were made to be broken. Like, that is just where society is your word means nothing. Your bond means nothing. Your promise means nothing. It's just something that you say. The contract that you put your name to when you signed the dotted line means nothing. It's just a John Hancock on a piece of paper. And as long as you feel like honoring that, you will continue to. But the moment that you feel like breaking it, you simply say, it was made to be broken.
Right. Well, I think for most people, I would say if they have any kind of perhaps religious upbringing, they would think that the word covenant is automatically associated with marriage, and which it is.
Sure, that's one
of many, right? And I think nowadays, and even once again, based on a couple of conversations I've had this week, a good friend of mine is going through a divorce, as have I, as have you.
Correct.
And just the comment he made was like, "Wow, I can't believe how common this is." But as far as breaking that covenant, but
sure. But as a Christian, we understand contracts weren't made to be broken. They were made to be kept,
enforced,
and kept without even having to be enforced. You just honor it, right? And so the watering down of covenants into these treaties and agreements and into these contracts has taken away, I think, the importance of how serious a covenant is. Throughout history, they would have rituals that was called a covenant ceremony. And as I was studying, I found out that it was a real big deal. It could be between two families. It could be between two nations. It could be between two people that would carry on through generations. And it would be honored through generations and kept. But they would take an animal and they would cut this animal in half in this ceremony, producing blood. And it was signified as a blood covenant. And each party would get a half of that animal, and it would be theirs. And the ceremony really meant something in ancient days and in ancient times. And then it transitioned into a blood covenant between two people where they would actually just make a slight cut and they would produce a slight amount of blood and signify their word and their bond by uniting that blood together, saying that we're sealed, we're committed, and nothing will break this relationship. And John Jonathan and David had a covenant that was bound.
Melchizedek and
Yeah, I have just a few. There was the covenant God made with Noah in Genesis 9. It was an unconditional covenant, meaning that God promised, I will never destroy humanity again with a flood. There's nothing that anyone can do that breaks that covenant. That's an unbreakable covenant because God established it with no conditions. The covenant with Abraham. He tells him in Genesis chapter 12, I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Now, God spoke that to Abraham, and Abraham entered that covenant of acceptance, and it was unconditional. Like God spoke it, and he wasn't going to break it. And of course, he did. He established Israel through the lineage of Abraham because of his covenant. And then there's another covenant, the covenant with Moses. Now, this one was different because it was conditional. The children of Israel had requirements, and he makes this in Exodus chapter 19. They had to fulfill the stipulations in this covenant to stay and prosper in the land of God. And it was a covenant where God said, I'm making a promise to you, not because I'm a rule-driven God, but because in this covenant I'm making with you, there are certain stipulations that you have to obey to receive my blessings. Any thoughts?
These are things that I knew, but it's getting a good crash course of a memory.
Exactly. It's so deep, we can't go deep. Like, we don't have
the time. Yeah. But I think this is, once again, I'm going to go back to what I said earlier, this kind of an old-fashioned idea that's been misunderstood generationally now. But I think when you state to me that these two entities, whether it be the Almighty and like Moses or Abraham or Noah or whomever, or, between like with Jonathan and David, I'm sure we're going to get into, and Melchizedek, who was Jonathan's grandson, and how David protected him. There is this agreement that when they entered into, had a priority that was placed on it that superseded most any other agreement. And that notion that holding steadfast to those oaths and those pledges has really gone by the wayside. And that's when, it's funny because most of my best friends, like I've known like decades, like most of my life. And when I share that with people, they're like, wow, that's so weird. Like I've known my best friend like 3 years. And like, that's a concept for me I have a hard time understanding because...
Me too.
Because it's like, when I pledge my loyalty to somebody, that doesn't mean I'm always going to agree with them. It doesn't mean I'm going to be a yes man. It doesn't mean that, no matter what, they poop ice cream and they, all this stuff. It just means that I pledge my loyalty and I'm here. But I'm really fascinated to hear you keep going because I think this is something that people should really think on him.
It is, and the reason that I'm foundationally laying and creating a picture is that when God makes a promise or a covenant, is that you can actually check whether God honored his promise. By now, we're so far in history that you can look and you can go back to when God spoke that word of what he's going to do. And then you can turn ahead into history where we are, and you can read history and see that God said it. And although it took generations, or although it took decades, or although it took hundreds of years, God honors his word. Yeah. God honored his covenant. He spoke what he was going to do before he ever did it. And then even with the failures of these men, even with the lack of faith and the lack of commitment, that God pursued them because he entered into covenant, and then he established what he was going to say. And I want to go over one more. I want to go over the covenant with David briefly. That
was coming to my mind.
Yes.
David was a man of covenant who made more than several.
That is correct. When God established covenant with David in 2 Samuel chapter 7, he said, I am going to establish a kingdom through you in which lineage will live forever. Well, what did that mean? Israel? No. It meant that through the seed of David, Jesus himself would descend from that lineage, and that he would lay his life down willingly on the cross and resurrect on the third day, which we call Easter and celebrate, and that through David and through the covenant that God made with David. And why? He said, because I found a man after my own heart. And when he said that, a light bulb went off, and I said in my mind, if your main attraction to David wasn't that he was going to keep your rules without screwing up, because he screwed up a lot. Yeah. But the fact of the matter was, you were attracted to his heart, then you must be a God that is attracted to relationship. Not rule driven, not stipulation driven, but relationship driven. That God desired to have a relationship with a man whose heart followed after God, and that when he found that, he said, I can establish my lineage through his seed. And he formed that covenant. But it was so many generations after he had promised through David, I'm going to establish a kingdom. And that kingdom will go on forever and ever and ever. And it is because I am attracted to the heart that you have that pursues me. And so I want to have relationship with you. Not I want to have rules. Not I want to have a system of religious stipulation. I see that heart. And it follows me, and it's after me, and I'm drawn to that. And so I will enter this covenant. And you're so right, because David understood what that meant. And so he began to be a man of covenant. And I wanted to have you briefly talk about the Jonathan and David. Now, I know you didn't do an in-depth study, but I know you have general knowledge, and that's all we have time for.
Sure.
So go ahead.
So the first king of Israel was Saul. Saul's son was Jonathan. Jonathan and David were besties. They were best friends. And they made a covenant with one another that no matter what would happen, that they would take care of, if one fell in battle or if one was promoted to king, whatever may come, they were going to honor one another, and they were going to honor one another's offspring, and so on and so forth. And then almost all of Saul's house was destroyed, because while David's heart was in line in position to God's heart, Saul's heart fell out of position. And unfortunately, that affected his entire house, his offspring, his wives, whomever, uncles and so on and so forth. But Jonathan had a son. Jonathan had a grandson. His name was Melchizedek, and he was kind of an outcast because he had bum feet.
And you know why? Because at the time that Israel and Saul was being overthrown, and that he was being ran out by a handmaiden who fell.
Yep.
And fell on him
and busted his feet up.
Yeah,
so he always walked with club feet, and he was, because of his family lineage, because of the disgrace, because of his personal issues, he was, they're kind of self-imprisoned, but he was also banished. But once David was in a position as king, he said, I made a covenant with Jonathan, his whole family, and he sent people out like, hey, does he have any family left? And they found that he had a grandson
dwelling in the city of Lodabar.
Lodabar, that's right. And he went and got him, and he thought he was Melchizedek thought he was in trouble, but David was like, no, because of my covenant with your grandfather, I am honoring you. I am bringing you out of where you're at. I'm giving you nobility and a possession.
And you shall sit at my table and eat with me and eat with my family.
He fulfilled his oath, that covenant with Jonathan. And as you were talking, Carl, I think part of the priority that crosses over to the new covenant, the New Testament, is, and obviously the sacrifice of Christ, but, God says, do not swear by anything under heaven or earth, but simply let your yes be yes and your no be no. And I think that's because there is such a high priority that he places when he gives someone his word, that he wants us in turn to say yes or just no. And as you're talking, that's kind of what is coming to my mind. And but so David had a lot of covenants, but that's an important one, and that's a whole nother story or podcast within itself with Melchizedek.
It really is. There's so many layers to the covenants, and like we could go on and on and on, and just any avenue that you want to go with.
Well, and even
covenant.
in Job 31 made a covenant. He said, "I've made a covenant with my eyes that I will not look lustfully on any woman," and that's a whole interesting. That book is just basically a conversation between Job and his friends and the Almighty, which is really interesting. But yeah,
and there's only two more that I want to bring out, and it's because it's the most relevant. And the first covenant that I want to bring out would be the covenant of works. Now, this is what was established at the time of Jesus' first appearance on earth. He was on earth where there were so many rules and stipulations and regulations and a life of system of religion that it became very impersonal. It was one of the most distant paths to personal relationship with God. That's the best way I can put it.
Yeah, that's a good way.
Because it was only rules. It was only what I can't do, what I can do, and what I must do. And it served its purpose for a time. Now, that covenant was called a covenant of works, and it was conditional. But then Jesus came, and this is where we are now. And this is why I want to talk a little longer about this covenant, because of what many people are going through, and the thing is like Christians and non-Christians.
Yeah, people.
Atheist and non-atheist,
right.
Black and white, red, yellow, green, and everyone in between. It doesn't matter who you are, you're going through stuff. And so it's important to recognize that we are in a covenant that is a covenant, and this is the final one I want to talk about. It's a covenant of grace, and it's unconditional.
Yeah.
It's an unconditional covenant. And it's talked about in so many occasions, but Romans chapter 5, verse 12 through 21, Hebrews chapter 7, verse 27, Hebrews chapter 10, verse 14. Those are just a few that those that would like to read, like after the podcast, may be interested to find out about what that is. But we are saved by God's grace, and all we're required to do is put our faith in Jesus Christ alone, because keeping the law and being perfect is impossible. Trapped in humanity, and we needed grace. And so when these synagogue rulers, and we had talked about the scribes and the Pharisees now 2 weeks in a row, but when these people were constantly trying to trap him and kill him and trap him and kill him, one of the biggest attacks that they brought upon him is because of the way he was conducting his ministry. He was abolishing the Old Testament law. Well, they were bound to that. They were slaves to that. And Jesus finally tells them, and I cannot remember the scripture right now. It's left me, but you can look it up. He tells them, I did not come to abolish the law, but I am the fulfillment of the law. He was fulfilling a new covenant. He was ushering in a new covenant. He was establishing a new covenant that wasn't abolishing, but there was a transition or a transformation from rules to relationship. And God is not a God of rules. God is a God of relationship. Just as he saw the heart of David that pursued God, when he sees our heart, he's drawn to us. As our heart pursues him, he is there. As a gentleman who stands at the door and gently knocks, waits for us to turn our affections to him and accept him into our life. Now, at that moment where we receive grace and forgiveness for sin, we have entered into a covenant. Now, I've showed you briefly with a few covenants how God spoke sometimes centuries before he manifested his promise, but he always delivers. He always honors his covenant. He never breaks his covenant. And we're so used to words meaning nothing, to words achieving nothing. It's just talk. But with God, his words are never broken. They're sustained throughout eternity. And this is the God that we serve, and this is the God that desires to protect us. That is part of the benefit of the covenant. And that is the whole reason that I, on Monday or Tuesday, said to you, we need to find something to share that brings security to the people that are struggling right now, that are scared and are afraid and they are confused. It's in the church world. It's out of the church world. No matter who you talk to, there's uncertainty. There's questions. And people need to be secure, and people need to feel safe and have peace and have joy, because the joy of the Lord is your strength. Have you noticed how we talked about how so many people are just so tired and exhausted and they have no energy? And we've even battled that.
Oh, yeah, I'm totally there.
The Bible says that the joy of the Lord is your strength. A lot of people don't have joy anymore. It's the truth. I'm sorry. We battle it. Everybody battles it. But we need to mount up with wings as eagles so that when we run, we don't fall. And we need to have joy for our strength. And there is a security and a confidence in knowing that we are entered into a covenant of grace with God, and that he doesn't break covenants. He honors them. And so as his children, we are protected. We are provided for. We have provision and safety. That doesn't mean that we don't go through hard times. And that doesn't mean that bad things do not happen to good people. But no matter what we go through day by day and step by step and moment by moment and event by event, we have the confidence to know that we are not alone, because God is in covenant with us and he does not leave us alone. And I wanted to establish that, to remind people that this is a time where we must understand covenant, so we don't feel alone and deserted and unprotected and unprovided for.
Yeah, wow. Okay, so there is a lot. So Matthew 5:17 is where he says, "Do not think I've come to abolish the law, but to fulfill the law and all the prophets." And, part of the reason that is so important is because under the old Levitical law, there were over 600 rules. I believe it was 636 or something like that.
I've heard as many as 666, believe it or not.
Okay. There was a bunch. Yeah. And the law also said that if you break one, you're guilty of breaking them all. So there is and I'm going to say this because things I've recently encountered, like it's this thing with this religious spirit, and whether it masks itself in the Levitical law or the American gospel, where it's like if your behavior doesn't line up with the popular culture and those sub communities, you're an outcast and that you aren't aligned with God's heart. And if even by those Levitical standards, I mean, you look at David, who there's a handful of people in the Old Testament you can pinpoint to where linchpins in regards to not only the Jewish faith, but our Christian faith as well. And David certainly is one of them. But David was an adulterer.
A murderer.
A murderer.
Well, by proxy, by sending out his Hittite buddy, Uriah. There was a lot of despicable things that David did that would mean that he was guilty of breaking all the laws on a number of times, yet God still saw his position of his heart and sought him. And when he didn't have answers and he didn't always miss or hit the mark, he was still in that place. And I believe that it's like that authenticity I talk about, like God is really attracted to that. And it's that authenticity where, we're talking about this covenant, and we're talking about, when God says, do not swear by anything under heaven or earth, but let your yes be yes, your no be no. What we need to understand, and creationists believe this, but evolutionists don't, that literally the reason God's word is such a priority is because everything is in existence, he spoke it. Yes.
The power of his word, the existence of everything that ever was, is, or will be.
And still is sustained
Yes.
by his word. That's the beauty of it also.
Yes.
It's a continuing byproduct or a continuing effect that there was nothing. He spoke a word, it genocide, and even after that, it's that word that sustains throughout eternity.
Exactly. And it's that word that even at this moment allows us to do what we're doing. So, I've just learned the hard way that I have a handful of people in my life that I value their opinion, and literally everyone else, no
You don't.
offense.
Let's just say that.
Yeah, you can go pound salt.
You don't.
And I really had to kind of learn the hard way that in a regards of removing myself from the American gospel, which is a term I use, and whenever I speak to people, and I had conversations with two really good friends this week, and I shared with Carl that are atheists or that are moving into the realm of an agnostic, which is a big change, a big move, and also just a friend who's going through a really difficult thing and just questioning God's or his place in the world in regards to how God looks at him. And these are big questions, but the American gospel will want to look at them and say, well, they haven't entered a covenant or they haven't fulfilled this religious ritual obligation. Therefore, their pondering and their searching is insignificant. And I would just say it's the opposite. I would certainly say that the life Christ led definitely verified that it is the opposite. But in addition to that, I just want to really, really hit things home that our understanding of things doesn't mean that God's dependent upon where we're at in our understanding, because we're never going to be where he is at understanding. I would just say it's got the authenticity and the desire that we have in knowing and understanding and having a relationship with the Almighty. And I believe that genuinely that gets overlooked with a lot of how the structure of America, just as a culture, but certainly this the American gospel is. And regarding covenant, I just feel like, it doesn't matter how much you know, it matters how much you care. And I think that, just as people understand that, I think God harnesses and understands that better. So I just want to encourage people that what we're saying, what Carl is certainly teaching and unveiling, is just really important. And even if you are stuck in that, I would even say that evil American gospel system, that you can break out of that once you fall in love and you with Christ, and you realize it isn't about how often you hit the mark. It's just that you're really trying to hit the mark.
Yeah, there are a few accounts in Scripture where Jesus deals with the discussion of the Old Testament law because he was transitioning into establishing grace. And they were trying to impress Jesus by telling him about the law, even though he was going to be the fulfillment of the law. And one of the encounters is Matthew chapter 5, verse 27. It's just one. There are so many things that we could say, but we don't have time. And he tells them, when he's trying to show them that he is not here to abolish the law, but he actually is taking the law even farther, and he's making it a matter of the heart, which is what we talked about. He says to these people that are trying to trick him, "You have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not commit adultery." Well, now that was one of the laws to be obeyed. Another one was murder. You shall not commit murder. Jesus says, "I say to you that whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart." There's that word again. So what Jesus is saying is that you're so proud of yourself that you've not committed a murder, and so under that, you're considered Christine clean because you haven't committed that act. My concern goes beyond the act. My concern is that if there's anger in your heart that propels you to commit the act of murder, you have already committed it in my book, because I'm a God of heart relationship. He tells them, you're so proud because you have not committed adultery. So under your law, you are Christine and you are perfect and you have kept the law. But my law, how I operate, I am saying that if you lust on a woman in your heart and you've not yet committed that act of adultery, you've already committed the act in my book. So what he's saying is, I don't just simply rule and reign. I search relationship. If he was a God that ruled, it would be a religion of what you can do and what you can't do. If he has your heart, he has your life. He has your actions. And it all begins, and we've talked so many times about how an action begins with a thought. Jesus knew that if you are walking past a hot woman and you are stopping and you are gazing and you are thinking and you are allowing that seed to get in your heart, that the next logical step is to act on that. And so what he's saying is that in your heart, the lust of the flesh, the lust for this woman is already taking root. So I know where it's going to go. You've already committed the act of adultery, even though you haven't acted on it yet, because you're bound by the law that says you can't commit that act, but it's in your heart. And I am a God that desires heart relationship. So you're a Christian and you want to go out and you want to do the bar scene, not to talk to friends, but to get drunk and to pick up a woman and to lust after a woman and to bring her home and to fornicate. And you have all this stuff already planned out. Jesus is saying, if I have your heart, your affections will be towards me, in the sense that you will come home instead of going there, and you will pursue relationship with me, intimacy with me. You'll get in my word. You'll cry out to me in covenant with me for me to show you things and teach you things and give you peace and give you love. So what Jesus is saying is, I'm not a God of rules. I'm not a God of stipulations. I am a God of relationship. And because I am a God of relationship and I desire your heart, if you give me your heart, you will not want to hurt me. You will not want to disappoint me. You will not want to do those things that I am a holy God, and be ye holy because I am holy. Your desires won't be to go out and commit those acts. Your desires will be as his desires are. That is why he has pursued the heart. That is why he is a God of relationship, because foundationally, if you're in relationship, the last person that you want to hurt or devastate is the person you love. You don't say, gee, what can I do to hurt my wife today? What can I do to hurt my husband today? I know it doesn't please them for me to do these things, but I desire to do them. And can I do it and still be in relationship with this person? Can I put my toe really close to the line because my desires are leading me that way? Or is your desire to make the one you love happy, to make the one you love fulfilled, to bond with them, to learn what makes them happy, to allow them to feed into you what they desire? That is a God of relationship. And that is different than the Old Testament law, which was nothing more than a God of rules, and it was impersonal. And so that's what Jesus is pursuing. And that's what I wanted to bring out this week, to bring comfort and security to those that know him, and to introduce an opportunity for people that are looking for relationship that they're not finding in addictions, or they're not finding in sex, or they're not finding in people, or maybe their career or their job, or those things that define who they are, that's their identity, but they're still empty. They're still longing for something. That is Jesus. And that is what I wanted to bring out today. I wanted to bring out the desire that Jesus has for relationship and not rules, because rules take care of themselves if foundationally it is relationship that is pursued.
Wow. That last line is, say that last line one more time.
Rules take care of themselves if relationship is what is foundationally chosen or pursued.
Yeah.
You don't worry about rules if your concern is relationship. If all you're doing is wondering what you can do and get away with. You're not in relationship anyway. You're in religion. You're religious. And that's what Jesus came to break. And he said, I'm doing away with that system because I had no personal connection. I had no intimacy. So I am establishing a new covenant, a covenant of grace, whereby which you can pursue me to any level you want. The depth that you want, we can go to. Don't keep me at the surface.
I just think what you're saying is just crucial. And I'd like to hear your opinion with everything that's going on in the world today. And these are conversations that I find people engaging with me more and more. And maybe it's just me, or maybe it's just a topic of conversation amongst people right now. I don't know. But it's this idea of, the final act is upon us. Like in plays or movies, there's normally 3 acts. And we're entering into that final act. And I think what you're saying is important. And I want to hear your explanation. We were talking earlier about these eschatological things that have been spoken and foretold for centuries are now upon us. The idea of the global elite in business and technology and governance and medicine are literally last week, of course, they met with Davos. Now, even as we're speaking, they're meeting in Washington, D.C. with the Bilderberg Group, and people can, kind of scoff at that, but everything is being put into place for this one world governmental, one world monetary, one world medical identification antichrist system. It is not subversive anymore. It is in the wide open. And my interpretation, and I want to hear yours, the reason why rules don't matter, the reason why the focus is on, and I'm going to word it this way, how your heart is positioned towards Christ's. The reason that is so important is going back to that intimacy. And, with my fiance, we're not physically intimate, but we're intimate on every other level. She knows everything about me and everything about her, so on and so forth. And there's things that I tend to do that drive her bonkers and vice versa. So it's the idea of, because I love her, I'm not going to try to purposefully do those things. But I feel like where we are at, if we don't have that intimacy of covenant, that guarantee, if I can even put that word on it, we are going to be succumb to the deception of this. We are going to be, cannon fodder for this spiritual assault that, in this spiritual battle that we're in. And for me, this far surpasses the idea of salvation. Not that to minimize that at all. Where you're going to spend eternity. To me, it identifies where your heart is, what it is containing, and then how you approach the rest of the days that are given to you in position with the Almighty, but also in position with the impact that you can have, positive or negative, in this world. That's why I think this is so important. Beyond just, are you going to go to heaven or are you going to go to hell? I think it's important to be able to maintain the integrity of your soul and of your spirit. And when you're in covenant, when you're in that relationship, and you're listening to God more than the American church, these wolves in sheep's clothing, and that, now, and I shared a video with Carl, this, now that there are people literally in the pulpit preaching that God was a liar, that the serpent was telling the truth in the garden, and propagating these lies about living you can live a lifestyle of, whether it be homosexuality or lesbianism or whatever that is, and that is blessed and sanctified by the Almighty. And listen, I'm working on my own salvation with fear and trembling. Whatever two consenting adults do, that's between them and their Creator. But there's so much trickery and deception right now, and I think this covenant idea is so important that we would not be led astray, we would not be given into these ruses, that we would not fall or not fall, but we would not get off the path. We're going to fall, we're going to stumble, we're going to screw up. That's just part of it. But I really would like to hear, I know it was kind of long-winded, but I really like to hear your thoughts on why this is so crucial for not just this moment, but the moments that are coming, that this time that we're entering in, because I don't think we can backtrack. I think we're going to go forward. I think we're going to have to plow through to this evil, this Antichrist system that is now established, and I would just like to hear your thoughts on that.
I had no idea that you were going to present that question, so of course this is just
came to me, so
just to submit to Holy Spirit and allow Him to give me the direction. But I feel like in reference to what you just asked, there's a scenario that Jesus described. He calls Himself a shepherd in many situations, and that we are His sheep. And He says that the sheep knows the voice of their shepherd. The reason that the sheep know the voice of the shepherd, in studying that in the past, the picture is beautiful, and the depth of them knowing the shepherd's voice is deep. And that is that a shepherd spends so much time with his sheep. They are alone. They are in the fields. David was a shepherd. David was tending to the flock when Samuel came and picked him after going through 6 other brothers and not accepting them as king because God had chosen David. Well, where was David? David was being a shepherd. Well, what was Jesus? Jesus said, I am a shepherd. Is that a coincidence? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. But when a shepherd is shepherding, he has alone time with his sheep. He has intimate time with his sheep. It's just him and his sheep. And it's very important for the sheep to recognize the voice of the shepherd. Because without that voice guiding them and protecting them, the sheep will literally walk right off of a cliff. They're not real bright. They're very trusting, okay? And they're a lot like humanity. We're not real bright. But Jesus says, the sheep will know my voice. And when deception is everywhere, the sheep will know my voice. When lies are everywhere, the sheep will know my voice. In studying that, what I found was that you could take 50 shepherds. You could take 50 shepherds from different flocks, and you could put them at the front of the sheep, and you could have them speak one by one, giving commands, and those sheep will not move until they hear the voice of their shepherd. You'll have 49 shepherds giving commands to the sheep, talking to the sheep, telling the sheep lies, telling them truths, telling them things to harm them, telling them things to protect them. But the sheep don't move until the voice of their shepherd speaks. And when they hear that voice triggers in them, because why? They've had intimacy with the shepherd. They recognize the voice of the shepherd because the depth of the relationship that the sheep have with the shepherd is so deep, and it is so bonded that no matter whose voice is trying to pull them away, they don't go. Now, on the flip side of that, I also studied that you could put 5 flocks of sheep together. That's a lot of sheep. And you could stand a shepherd up on a hill, and that shepherd could call out commands to those 5 flocks of thousands of sheep, and the only sheep that will respond to that shepherd's command are the flocks that he shepherds. All those other sheep will stand there, and they will not move, but one by one, second by second, when that shepherd calls to those flocks of sheep, his flock will walk out of the other 4. They will walk away, and they will leave the surrounding sheep, and they will follow the shepherd. And so creating that analogy impromptu with no talking about what you were going to say, with the Holy Spirit leading me, and I truly believe that he is, when you have him leading me to your question, the days that are here and the days that are coming, if we are not in relationship with him and honoring this covenant, this new covenant of grace, if we are not in relationship with Jesus, we will not know his voice. Any command that comes from anyone will lead us astray. But when we know the voice of Jesus, when we've had intimacy with him, no matter what shepherd or what ruler or what politician, no matter what institution, no matter what law, rule, or mandate is given to us, as sheep of Jesus, we will recognize the spirit that is behind that, and we will be protected, and we will be provided for, and we will be guarded, and we will have safety because we have honored our shepherd, who is Jesus, and we recognize his voice through covenant. And that's what I was trying to say, but had no idea that we were going to get here, is the importance of the hour that we are in does not call for a covenant of works. It calls for a covenant of relationship, because we are going to have to know Jesus' voice in these final hours. I hope that answers your question. I did the best I could
I
with
think
short notice.
No. I think that's not only a good illustration and analogy, I think it's a solid historical and scriptural and factual, actual real life application as well. And I think you're right. Now I know you're right. Yeah. And the one thing I took away from that is your analogy where you had 50 shepherds, but they only know the one shepherd. I feel like you have 49 voices that are saying things that may be interesting or compelling or even thought-provoking.
Or even, like, make people feel safe.
Right.
You know?
But safety isn't always the best position.
It isn't.
If you are not doing what you're not listening to whom you should be listening to. Right. So I thank you for allowing God to speak through, because I wanted people to understand why this is so important right now. And I think encapsulated it. I think, unless you have anything else to add.
No, I think that's it, man.
I think that's it. I'm just going to ask you, I think this is something that people need to hear. Like I said, I've had conversations this week with friends that were atheists moving into more of an agnostic place, friends that are just searching, even friends that are churchgoers that are in a position. So everything that you said earlier, Carl, it doesn't matter black, white, gay, straight, tall, short, fat, skinny. Mm-hmm. There is a call being heard in this hour, and I believe this is part of what we are purpose in this podcast. But I think this is where the station that people need to be tuned into, not necessarily a podcast, but what the Creator, what the Almighty, what Christ himself is saying, because there's a world full of hurt coming down on us.
You know, I've never done this on this podcast. Not one time, being as a guest or being as a co-host. And I'm going to do something that I said I would never do, and you should never say never. But I don't want anyone to think that there's 1 ounce of my flesh that seeks accolades or acknowledgement or recognition. And I'm asking people that are listening to this podcast to share this podcast. I've never done that. I'm not about that. I'm not about numbers, because God's always been for the underdog, and God always does miracles through the minority, the low numbers. Look at Gideon. Read the story. But I'm saying that this is not about us. This is bigger. This is not about this podcast. This is bigger. If you have someone in your life that you feel would be encouraged, I am petitioning for the first and maybe only time, because of the importance of this topic, to share this, to send this out there, not for us to be recognized, but solely to help people with this message. They're not getting this message anywhere. They're not hearing this anywhere. This is coming straight from Jesus himself. And I just think that it is important. That is my final act in this podcast, is that I'm doing something I said I wouldn't do. I am asking you to share this. And it isn't so we have more clicks. or more numbers or get popular or grow. It's because I have a burden for people, and I want this to get out there.
I second that. And just to let people know where we're at, we are anywhere you could listen to podcasts. We're Apple, Google Play, Spotify, Breaker, under Flawedcast, Flawedcast CLE. We're on Rumble, Flawed Inc. We're sort of on YouTube, Flawed Inc. You can find us on the Project Mockingbird social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We're on Gab, we're on Parler, we're on Getter under Flawed Inc. Link to get a copy of my book is below, Smith's Art of Man and Repair Manual. If you want one, can't afford one, send us an email at flawedinccle@gmail.com. Be more than happy to send you the PDF. And also, if you have any questions, if there's something that we said that maybe triggered, you have something that you don't quite understand, reach out, and we're going to do the best we can to answer that and to be transparent and authentic. But thanks for listening, and we will catch you next week.